with us if you're following this one, and we'll continue to kind of push forward. Danny, did you have any other sort of just observations from today's game in general?
I think the biggest one is that they just looked. It's the most comfortable they've looked playing this year, in my opinion. And obviously, USC is not the worst team that they've played all year, but Notre Dame tonight finally looks like a Notre Dame team I expect to see when I turn on the TV every Saturday. And I haven't always been able to say that this year. So that was certainly the most refreshing part of tonight. And it excites me for next week and the weeks to come.
Yeah, I think that's the most important thing for me is that I'm sort of a little bit like rejuvenated, I guess, for the rest of the season. I mean, we've kind of already touched on it, and maybe this is the game that kind of gets them, clicking on all cylinders. And at the end of the year, they're playing their best football. And like I mentioned, possibly going to a New Year's Six Bowl and winning that for the first time in a while as well. No, it would have been fun to, or it would be fun to see if this team kind of, like I said, puts the pieces together, plays better offensively. I think the better offensively they play, the better the defense is going to continue to improve this year overall. So yeah. I think and on the screen here, part of the game plan, bend but don't break defensive strategy. I do think that was part of it today. They wanted to keep Drake London in front of them. And it seems like every time they play USC, that seems to be the strategy. They've done that the past couple of years when they played Amon-Ra St. Brown and all those guys a few years back. That's USC for you in a nutshell, is that they want to beat you over the top. They want to air raid you. They're not going to necessarily run it down your throat all the time. But when Notre Dame does play them, they do tend to have some of their best rushing games simply because Notre Dame's trying to keep them from, completing 50-yard passes down the field. So I think this game from the defensive side of the ball is more of an anomaly than anything else.
I would agree with that. I don't think that anything tonight that Notre Dame fans saw should cause any concern with the exception of Kyle Hamilton's injury.
Right. Absolutely. And then I think it kind of goes to this comment too that I'm about to throw up. Let's see if I can find it again. Right here from Joseph Barrett. This is really where I think I disagree overall. I mean, yards are yards. Yards don't necessarily equal points. I mean, if you look at some of the Clark Lee defenses of old, teams put up a lot of yards on the Notre Dame defense. But if you're a team that can hold in the red zone, if you're a team that can commit, costly turnovers on the defensive side of the ball, if you can rush the passer with 4 when you need to, then I don't know. I think are a little too unfair to the defense, specifically with how much they've had to bail out the offense this season.
I don't understand calling this a poor defensive performance when they ultimately allowed 16 points. In today's college football, that's nothing. That's a great performance defensively. The yardage total was a little high, but like you said, yards don't equal points. You could give up 600 yards and pitch a shutout. The chances of that happening are slim, but you can do it. And yeah, Drake London had 15 catches because USC threw to him almost every play. How many of those catches were catches that were behind the line of scrimmage? This game, as far as what Drake London did, was basically Sammy Watkins against Ohio State back in the Orange Bowl, way back when, with the difference being Notre Dame was just the better team tonight and was able to do that. But some of those catches for London were essentially run plays. That's just how they wanted to get him the ball. I mean, you see him on a speed sweep and the ball gets tossed forward to him. That's a catch. Okay. But it's a lot different than him running 75 yards down the sideline on a go route. I would rather, have 15 catches. How many times do you find the end zone?
Right, exactly. And I mean, I think, like I said, I think people forget that they only gave up 16 points. They won by 15. Like you mentioned earlier, they were up, 24-3 at one point. So when you're up 24-3, you're going to play a little bit of prevent D. The USC has the capability on offense that when you play prevent D to move the football. And then I think first and foremost, and we've touched on this a little bit, but Drake London's also just a really good football player that also had like 20 targets.
He's going to be a first-round pick. He's good.
So yeah, no, and I think Johnny Bays kind of said it best here. Yeah, when your teams are going to pass on you, when you're up, you're going to give up some big plays. I think that also opens up the running game. I'd like to see, and I don't know this off the top of my head, I would like to see what Ingram's stats were from the first half to the second half, because it did look like he was able to start picking up more chunk yards.
Oh, no doubt about that. He was much better in the second half than the first.
And then I don't want to keep arguing with Joseph Barrett here, because he did say respectfully disagree. I don't think he remembers the Marquise Step game when Clark Lee was the defensive coordinator for Notre Dame. And it was exactly the same thing, where Notre Dame had a commanding lead, or at least kind of like they sort of had they kept
USC at an arm's length all night long. That was a game. If there was an extra quarter, USC might have been able to find a way to win that game. But Notre Dame kept going up by 10. USC kept scoring a touchdown, cut it to 3, back up by 10, cut it to 3. That's what the entire second half was. I believe that was the Marquise Step game you're talking about.
Yeah, and if it was, then like I said, we're talking about a couple games against USC where I think we're kind of getting this revolving door of what happens a lot of the times when they play USC. Notre Dame usually gets out, at least recently. I think this is now the 4th game they've won in a row against USC. They typically get out to a pretty good lead. USC has shown in recent years to be, susceptible to letting teams get to bigger leads. They commit penalties, they commit turnovers, and then they have to kind of crawl their way back in. And like I've mentioned, and you've mentioned, they have the athletes to kind of crawl their way back in. And I don't know. Like I said with Joseph Barrett, I obviously respectfully disagree as well. If this is something that's more of a trend for the remainder of the season, or with Kyle Hamilton out, if Kyle Hamilton's going to be out the remainder of the season, and it's a trend because of that as well, then we might have a different discussion. But let's see what happens next week against North Carolina first, before I'm gonna, I guess, complain too much about the the defense as a whole. And he actually this tier overall. One thing I to find out, or what his stats were prior to the second half of that game, because I would imagine it was a lot worse.
Yeah, I'm going to search for that because I'm very curious now.
And then Jimbo has a good point, and this is kind of something that we brought up, is that USC had some yards through the air. Drake London had 15 catches, whatever it was, but they didn't actually have a passing touchdown either. So
So in the first half, Ingram had 53 rushing yards on 10 carries.
So he was pretty good most of the game in general. He had a better second half than he had a first half, but
the third quarter is where he did most of his damage. The third quarter is where he did most of his damage.
Absolutely.